In 2018, a man in San Francisco vanished without a struggle, without a witness, without a single emergency call. Months later, his neighbors watched hazmat cleaners scrub his home while unfamiliar people slept inside it. What police eventually found behind a painting is why this case still has no answers. The man's name was Brian Egg. He was 65 years old and had lived in San Francisco almost his entire life. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't famous, he didn't live in a flashy neighborhood. He owned a modest house in the south of Market area, a part of the city that had changed a lot since he bought it in the 1970s. When Brian purchased the place, it was rough around the edges. By 2018, it was surrounded by tech offices and new developments, and the property alone was worth far more than he'd ever paid for it. Brian was known locally, not in a big way, just enough that people noticed when he wasn't around. He had worked for years as a bartender at The Stud, a well-known gay bar not far from his home. Even after he stopped working there, people still recognized him. Neighbors described him as gruff but kind, the kind of person who complained about noise but still picked up trash on the street. He tended to the plants along Clara Alley. He walked his dog every single day. People could set their watches by it. He also had a reputation for being generous, sometimes too generous. Brian had a habit of letting people stay with him when they didn't have anywhere else to go. Friends later said he didn't like seeing people struggle, and he believed most people were basically good. Over the years, he let acquaintances crash on his couch, sometimes strangers who had been introduced through friends. It wasn't unusual for someone new to be staying at his house for a few weeks. That detail would matter later. Sometime in late May or early June of 2018, Brian disappeared. No one knows the exact day. There was no final phone call, no goodbye text, no sign of a struggle reported by neighbors. He simply stopped being seen. At first, nobody panicked. Brian was private. He didn't check in constantly. A few days without seeing him wasn't unusual. But then a week passed, then another. His dog wasn't being walked anymore. The plants in the alley weren't being tended. Neighbors noticed lights on in the house at odd hours, but they didn't see Brian himself. By July, friends and family were worried enough to call police and ask for wellness checks. Officers went to the house 3 separate times. Each time, they knocked. Each time, no one answered. Each time, they saw no signs of forced entry. So, each time, they left. What they didn't know was that Brian was already dead. While police were knocking on the door, other things were happening that didn't make sense. On June 1st, someone using Brian's name and his credit card purchased a used 2007 BMW from a dealership in Newark, California. The car cost $5,500. It wasn't Brian buying it. Surveillance footage later showed a man named Lance Silva at the dealership. Friends said he'd never driven a BMW like that. Friends said he wasn't shopping for a car, but the purchase went through anyway. Around the same time, neighbors started seeing unfamiliar people coming and going from Brian's house. Not just visitors, people who looked like they were living there. One of them was a 52-year-old transient man named Robert McCaffrey. Neighbors saw him entering and leaving regularly, like the place was his own. Still, no one called police. San Francisco is a city where people mind their business. Brian was known to let people stay with him. It didn't immediately seem alarming. That changed in mid-August. One morning, neighbors noticed a truck parked outside Brian's house. Men in protective suits were unloading equipment. Not movers, not contractors. They were a private crime scene cleanup crew, the kind that shows up after violent deaths. People watched as they carried in industrial cleaning supplies, buckets, hoses, chemicals. Not long after, sudsy water started pouring out of the front door and running down the sidewalk into the storm drain. The smell was strong. Not just garbage or sewage, something worse. A neighbor named Scott Free lived directly across the street. He watched the cleanup happening and felt something was deeply wrong. Brian hadn't been seen in months. Now strangers were scrubbing his house like they were erasing something. Scott called 911. This time, police listened. They obtained a search warrant and entered the house on August 14, 2018. Inside, they found multiple people living there. None of them were Brian. Cleaning supplies were everywhere. The odor of decay hung in the air even after days of scrubbing. It wasn't subtle. Officers immediately knew something bad had happened. Robert McCaffrey was inside the home. He was arrested on the spot. He had over $1,000 in cash on him, which he claimed was meant to pay the cleanup crew. That alone raised serious questions. 2 days later, police arrested Lance Silva at a nearby hotel. Surveillance footage tied him to the BMW purchase made with Brian's credit card. Both men were charged with homicide, identity theft, fraud, and several other crimes. At this point, police still hadn't found Brian. They began a full search of the house. Cadaver dogs were brought in. For 4 days, officers combed through every room. The dogs kept alerting near the same area. The smell was strongest there. It led them to a wall. There was a large painting hanging on it, nothing unusual at first glance. When investigators removed the painting, they found a concealed door behind it, not a closet, a hidden access panel. Behind the door was a small room built beneath the staircase. Inside that room was a massive 6-foot-long fish tank. The tank wasn't filled with water. It was filled with a murky chemical mixture. Bottles of drain cleaner and Drano were scattered nearby. Submerged inside the tank was a human torso. No head, no hands. The body had been weighed down with a rolled-up carpet and an iron sawhorse to keep it from floating. Bone fragments were later found in a planter in the backyard. Whoever did this had tried to dismantle Brian completely. The chemicals had accelerated decomposition. The torso was badly degraded, but DNA testing confirmed what everyone already suspected. The remains belonged to Brian Egg. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. Brian had died from blunt force trauma before being dismembered. There was no way to determine exactly how he was killed beyond that. Too much time had passed, too much damage had been done. The discovery shocked the neighborhood. Brian hadn't been taken somewhere remote. He hadn't been dumped. He'd been hidden in his own home while other people lived there, slept there, and used his money for months. Police believed Lance Silva and Robert McCaffrey were responsible. The evidence seemed obvious. Silva had used Brian's cards. McCaffrey had been living in the house and paying for the cleanup. Both had benefited financially. Both had been there while Brian was missing. But evidence and suspicion aren't the same thing. The district attorney ultimately dropped all homicide charges. Prosecutors said they couldn't prove who actually killed Brian. There were no witnesses, no clear murder weapon. The body's condition made it impossible to reconstruct the exact events. Being present after the fact wasn't enough to secure a conviction. Robert McCaffrey was released almost immediately. Lance Silva spent time in jail, but only on an unrelated parole violation. By April of 2019, he was free too. Neighbors reported seeing both men walking around the area again, living their lives. Meanwhile, Brian's head and hands were never found. 7 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. There are theories, none of them can be proven. The most common one is that Brian's generosity backfired, that he let the wrong people stay with him, that an argument or a robbery turned violent, that someone struck him, panicked, and tried to hide what they'd done. The chemicals, the dismemberment, the cleanup crew all suggest an attempt to destroy evidence and buy time. But why keep the body in the house? Why not dispose of it entirely? Some investigators believe the killers were more focused on keeping access to Brian's money at home than escaping detection. Moving the body would have drawn attention. Keeping it hidden allowed them to live there uninterrupted. Others wonder if more than 2 people were involved, if someone else delivered the fatal blow and left the cleanup to others. Without Brian's head and hands, some evidence may be gone forever. What's certain is this: police knocked on that door while Brian's remains were inside 3 times. No one answered, no one forced entry, and nothing compelled officers to look closer. Brian Egg was murdered in his own home and hidden behind a painting in a city full of people in plain sight, and whoever killed him has never been held accountable. So what do you think happened inside that house? Who really pulled the painting off the wall and opened that hidden door? This case still haunts the neighborhood, and it's a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing crimes don't involve strangers breaking in, but people who were already invited inside.